Welcome to another episode of Coder Conversations. Today we have film and television composer Luke Truan. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Good to have you on.
so yeah, if you don't mind, can you give a little bit about your background to the audience, like how what led up to your current position, and what were some of the steps you took to get there?
Yeah, so it started, a really long time ago. I was, going to be a professional concert pianist, like as a, like in high school. Got in a bad car wreck, went into IT, came back around to music in 2012. It's kind of like the quick path. And then I really just kind of got into it in 2012 and scored my first films. And so I've been scoring for 14 years. And it all started back, with Portal Origins back in 2013. And so I started doing student films and then kind of went from there and then got into sync licensing in 2020. And that's when I started doing a lot more stuff for TV. And it's been a really crazy ride. I always say that no one's path to music is a straight line. And,
Right.
my story is no exception to that. So that's kind of like a real quick recap of like how I kind of got back to music.
And for our audience, can you explain what sync licensing is?
Yeah, it's basically where you write music, usually in a particular format that's kind of for TV friendly, dialogue friendly, and they take your music and they synchronize it with a picture for TV, films, games, advertising, whatever, and
Okay.
then yeah, obviously you get paid for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's more to it than that, but that's the short version.
Cool, man.
Awesome. Yeah. So you said you actually started off in IT and around what was that 2012 or so?
Oh no, I started in IT in 2000.
2000. Okay. What
Right.
sector of IT was you in?
Well, I started actually pulling cable. I started really at the basics, and I worked my way up, studying on my own time, evenings and nighttime. Worked my way up to a systems administrator, and then to an engineer. Got all a bunch of certifications and stuff like that. And then by the time 2016, 2018 rolls around, I was doing IT security, cybersecurity, and stuff like that. And then I ended up doing compliance for bigger companies, doing vulnerability assessments, kind of like borderline hacking in, and writing up reports about how they're vulnerable and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I did with IT. But I jumped out of it in 2020 for music, 100%.
Awesome. What made you want to leave IT and pursue music?
Oh, well, I always wanted to do music, right? I mean, that's always the dream. And so, that stems all the way back from, my childhood, growing up, listening to the radio and trying to, play along with the piano in my grandma's, living room as a kid, 6th grade. So that's kind of where it comes back from, all the way back to that. And so I kind of always wanted to be in music.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean that must have been a interesting leap going from IT to something. I presume music is a little bit less stable than IT. So
Oh,
like,
yeah, of
what kind?
course, right? You can work up to the point where you have repeat clients, and then, of course, if you add sync licensing into it, you have a passive income that gets generated every quarter,
Oh
That's
wow.
awesome.
right? And then so on top of that, I do like to teach, and so I'm gonna be start to do private lessons, I'm coming up with video on demand stuff, and so I really wanna help others kind of, like, fulfill their dreams with music as well, and kind of take what I've learned and then kind of put my own spin on the educational side of it, and kind of like really, kind of, help other people, kind of get their dream going. And,
Sure.
I
Are you
studied,
thinking about like recording courses?
yeah, I'm thinking about doing some video courses, kind of like more of a smaller chunks, not so much bigger chunks like you see in different courses. Like it's going to be very
Right.
focused, but a lot of them, and it's going to like have a great title and description. So it's gonna be in a platform where it's easy to navigate, so I'm trying to figure all that stuff out. But yeah, I kinda see myself doing that because I love helping other people and teaching and stuff like that.
That's awesome. What's your process when you're composing a song?
Well, I mean, it depends on if I'm scoring a film or if I'm writing with, sync licensing in mind for TV or something that's more along the lines of that. But, given that, you still have to write a really great track, right? No matter whether it's for a film or for
Sure.
a TV show. So I guess the process, kind of starts with, let's say we'll take film scoring, for example. Um, I have to wait really until they come up with like a rough draft so I can kind of see what's going on. I can do it off of pictures and scripts, but I prefer to wait till it's, get the post production side going and I can have at least a rough cut, even if it's low resolution. That's all I need to kind of see the
Right.
vision of the director. And so then I
Right.
start marking up every, section where there might, be music. And then we have a spotting session with the producer and the director. And we kind of talk about what their vision is, like what type of music is here, right? What type of music is in the middle, the beginning, the end, and then where is music even going to be? And so that's kind of some of
Right.
the first steps because I actually like to use silence when appropriate.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What situations would silence be appropriate?
Well, okay. So one of the films that I scored this year, which I can't really give a lot about it because it's still kind of coming out, but I can tell you that it's a cinematic kind of thriller vibe. And so the score obviously reflects the tension and the darkness and the mystery. And then I use silence. Like I'll take an instrument and I'll let the tail of the instrument kind of like fade out naturally into the silence at just the right moment where it fits, right? And maybe there's something going on the TV or some other noise outside or in the room. And I kind of fade it into that noise as much as possible. And then sometimes I'll bring a smaller, like maybe some high strings with that silence after maybe a few seconds, not too long. You don't want to wait too long. So it kind of like you have to find the right timing and the pace. You kind of have to kind of gauge when you're looking at the visuals on where the music should be. And then you find out how to blend it and kind of make it end at the same time and where it's appropriate. So it's kind of like it's definitely an art form. It takes a lot of practice.
Sounds kind of complex.
It actually is. It's one of my favorite things to do because you can control the soundtrack 100% because you know what you're writing for, all the visuals in front of you. And
Right.
when you're writing for sync, you can write a killer track, but you don't always know where it's going to go. And so you try to make it fit as many possible scenarios as you can and give the editors what are called edit points. And so that's one of the techniques when you write with sync in mind is that you give edit points that are natural, that doesn't sound too choppy or out of place. And
So
Absolutely.
what is an edit point? What's an edit point exactly?
so an edit point, you guys have seen trailers, right?
Yeah.
Like trailer music, you know how it kind of like will have big hits and then
Mhm.
like a downer, like it has like a natural kind of like ending point to a section.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's an edit point. And so the trailer editors will actually edit to the music track most of the time. There's some cases where they don't, where they kind of like bring a lot of trailers into one visual, kind of scene. But most of the time they're cutting to the music because it's a formula. Trailer music you write with a very strict formula. It's a 3-act,
Right.
kind of structure. You may have kind of caught on to that listening to it. There's like a minimal section, there's kind of a medium build section, and then there's the hyped up, super hyped climactic section. Then it ends, and then there's like a little 2-bar reprise at the end.
So
Oh,
you'll
wow.
have like an intense Michael Bay kind of a moment.
Right? You could, yeah, you could do that, and you can have. So one of the trailers I just finished was for an anthemic sports. And so some of the reference tracks that they gave us were and visuals, really the visuals is what I kind of worked off of was for UFC. So it's
Oh,
really
wow.
intense, hard
Right.
hitting, action pass, super fast paced, hyped up trailer stuff.
Right.
And so that's
So I
super fun to write for. I mean,
Yeah, I kind of assume that you have to work across genres, depending on the work you get. Like, what are some of the genres that you've explored? Maybe hip hop. I know orchestral. Any
Oh,
others?
yeah. So, yeah, orchestra is like my main, obviously my sweet spot because that's what I've studied my entire life. But given that, I also know how to do mixing and mastering, right? So I can, and vocal production. So I can work with a lot of different people and blend orchestra into hip hop, for example, which I've done with, some artists like Gallo Loch Ness and London Elixir, Jay Nolan. We've got a couple tracks around, and I'm working on some other stuff with some other hip hop artists that's not quite out yet. But then at the same time, I can also write country. I can do strict classical. And then another one that I've recently finished that got turned over to another TV show was a hip hop orchestral blend, which is more strict classical, kind of like you'd hear in the TV show Succession or the Queen's Gambit, that kind of strict classical, but with a hip
Oh
hop
yeah,
blend.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah. So that was
Yeah,
super
seems
dope and super fun to write for. And we're really proud of that one.
it seems like occasionally there's like different trends. Like I know at one point dubstep was huge. Like what is the current
Yeah.
predominant trend right now?
One of the biggest trends is hip hop. Um, and then, of course, another big trend is trailerizing existing tracks. That's a big thing. And then, of course, the orchestral hip hop blend. That's huge right now as well. Country is really big. Again, it's kind of making a resurgence. And then
Yeah,
blending,
country's everywhere now.
yeah, and kind of blending the hip hop and country. Even that's really popular still.
Yeah,
And
there's
then
a new
classical,
song with Beyonce that's like kind
right?
of country, right?
Exactly right. And then you've got the other style, which I think is called hick hop, which is another genre that's kind of a newer one over the last I don't know, like decade, I think maybe or longer.
Was it like Bubba Sparks? Is he considered that?
I think so. There's kind of like a fine line of the genres that it kind of all rides on, but I would kind of put it in that category as well. It's kind of like the rap talking, a little bit of singing, with the trap drums, with the country instruments and stuff like that. So I think it's pretty cool.
So like what aside from like hip hop and orchestral, like what are some of your other favorite genres to produce for?
Oh yeah. So one of my absolute favorites, of course, is Star Wars style, and it is a style all on its own.
Right.
Right. And that's really hard. I mean, that's super hard. I mean, you've got the masters, like John Williams, of course, is the master of the Star Wars style. He created the style,
Sure, sure, sure.
right? But then you've got like Gordy Hobb, Steve Barton, Kevin Kiner. You know, those guys have kind of like come up to be the next masters. Under I kind of consider them like under John, of course, but they are the next masters of the genre.
Right. Who did that scene with Darth Maul?
Oh, you mean in like the Clone Wars series?
In I think episode 1.
Oh, you mean for the like the Phantom Menace?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that was John Williams. Yeah, he did that.
Oh, that was okay.
Yep. Yep. He even did the new Obi-Wan theme. He came back out of retirement for that.
Oh, that's
Oh wow.
awesome.
Yeah. And then of course he
Like
did, the ESPN theme not too long ago. And so he's still working. He did the Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny. So he's he said he retired, but then I guess he was like, "Oh no, I'm going to do this," but I can't blame him because it's like it's fun, but it's work, but you love it. And so you always want to write, and as a composer and a music artist, you're always inspired by new things, and music just comes out whether you want it to or not.
Yeah, would you say John Williams is one of the best composers for film?
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of people have this debate, right? They're like, "Oh no, Hans Zimmer is way better than John Williams," and I'm like, "Well,
Right.
it kind of depends on what style you're going for, right? I mean, traditionally, John Williams is the best, right? He's the best at storytelling through music. But then some people argue, no, Hans Zimmer does better storytelling through music with less instrumentation, right?
Interesting.
But I always say, I heard something that Hans Zimmer said. He says he uses the right instruments and sounds for the scene. No matter what it is, no matter how involved or complicated it is, he just does what he feels right for the scene. And so you can't fault him for that. I mean, he's like, multi award winning, multi decade composer, so he's brilliant at what he does. It's just a different style. And so there's a lot of debate always about those.
Now,
And I like both.
John Williams did Jurassic Park, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I love that the main theme. Da, 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 da.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Since the Star Wars is such a specific style, like how do you get inspiration to work on a project like that? You just listen to a previous track from Star Wars, or
Yeah, I mean, that's a
and
great question. I mean, typically, I'm constantly studying the genre. And so I have a really good idea of, what it's supposed to sound like and, what different instrument sections typically do if you're going for a certain section of a track that, you want a certain feel for, like if it's action, there's a lot of, horns and ostinatos and strings are very action oriented. I mean, if you take like let's say the Empire Strikes Back, when the snow speeders are searching for Han and Luke, right? It's kind of like dun, 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 like really fast action paced. And
Right,
so you kind
right,
of get used to go like if you want action Star Wars, you use kind of this instrument with this pacing and this notation and this general kind of concept, but then you have to make it your own. You can't just obviously you don't want to copy anything.
exactly. How do you know when to pull back? I know sometimes you want to add your own creative touch to it, but you can't deviate too far from the formula, or else it starts to sound off. So how do you know, like, when you've gone a little too far, you need to like rein it in?
Right. I mean, that's always the fine line is that I do tend to push the boundaries just a teeny
sure.
bit. Kind of like Gordy Hobb. I kind of like, and even Kevin Kiner's done this, but I think Gordy Hobb's done it probably a little bit more, especially with his Jedi Survivor soundtrack that won the Grammy. He and Stephen Barton did that. And so they really pushed the element of having Star Wars sounding instrumentation and elements and all that, but then they added new instruments and new soundscapes to kind of like layer underneath and or on top of the traditional Star Wars style. And so that's kind of how I approach it as well.
Right.
Right.
So you've also done work for television shows as well. What do you prefer, TV or film?
Well, I mean, I like both, really. I mean, because they give you a different challenge for each medium. And even games is even different. I look forward to working in the game industry at some point. I haven't really done any games yet, but I'm studying how it all works. It's a more technical aspect of composing because you have to compose for multiple scenarios in a game. What if the guy wins or loses or moves on to the next stage or has to repeat? You have to design
Right.
the music for all the different scenarios. So game music is very different, but TV and film, like I said, they're very different as well. And so I kind of really don't have a favorite. I mean, I started with film scoring, but then again, I really like doing the TV stuff because it's its own challenge. So it's kind of really hard to pick.
Now,
Exactly.
would you say that game composing is harder or no?
Well, certain aspects I would say seem harder. Um, you know, I would maybe not harder is not the right word, but I would say more involved. I would say because you have to design one track to meet different scenarios. So you're kind of redesigning one track multiple times. But
I
at
see.
the same time, the challenge is that track with all the variations have to seamlessly fit to the next section,
You mean
right?
kind of like a motif?
Kind of like a motif that then blends and like kind of smoothly rides itself or sails into the next section no matter what that next section is, because the game engine may bring in a different track than you actually wrote to be the next track, right? And so you have to design the tracks in a way
Right.
that they all blend. Like track A and Z, they still match at the end and the beginning, just like A and D, or B and D, and C and Z, whatever. They all have to blend in some way. So I think that's probably the challenge for that to me.
That sounds where it would get a little complex. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then you've
So
got
like
you've got not just linear development too, you've got horizontal development, which is a whole different complicated ball game, which I'm studying now.
so like what games have had a standout soundtrack to you, and what games like would you like to work on?
Obviously anything Star Wars would be the first pick. But at the same time, like I love the games like Horizon Zero Dawn, Jedi Fallen Order was the previous Star Wars game that I really liked. Jedi Survivor soundtrack is probably my favorite game soundtrack. Another game soundtrack that I absolutely love is the Horizon Zero Dawn first game. That was by Jordas Taman, and he did an amazing job creating like this sonic world around Alloy, which is the main character.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have heard that. I mean,
Oh yeah, yeah. I actually have it on PS5. I haven't really played a lot of it, but
yeah, it's
yeah.
nice because you got
Oh
Julie
yeah.
Elvin singing on the vocals for those tracks, right?
Right.
She's amazing. So,
So like what do you prefer? Like more the melodic type of soundtracks, or more the orchestral or ambient type of soundtracks in gaming?
well, I mean, I don't really have a favorite because I write for all of them. So when I'm writing, I'm trying to tell the best story I can with the music that matches the visuals and, kind of drives the story and complements what's going on. So it really could be a blend of all of them. I could write in one scene all of those things, you know, that we're talking about could be in one scene. And so I have to blend
So
them all
like
together in a creative way.
so like when you write, do you typically work alone, or do you work with others? Like what inspires you more like creatively?
Oh, I mean, working together with others is the most creative time period. Like that's like you're in hyper creativity mode because you've got ideas flowing back and forth. And it's like a huge brainstorming session, like at hyper speed, right? So I really love that aspect of it. Um, and so I'd say collaborating is probably my favorite in terms of the creative aspects, but I can be alone. Most of the time, composers write alone, right? But
Sure.
collaborating is the most fun. Yeah,
Like do you collaborate
because
directly
I
with the
love.
artist? Like how does a collaborative process look, or is it just strictly with other musicians?
So it varies between artists, actually. One singer that I worked with, Brianna, she prefers to have the track written, and then she does the top line and vocals and all that, and then I finish producing it, right? And so another artist that I've worked with, they will give a skeleton track of the drums, for example, and then I'll lay the entire orchestra on top of it. And then either they'll mix and master it or I'll mix and master it. So we kind of like go back and forth, like, okay, well, I did it this time. You want to do it the next time? That kind of thing.
Yeah. That's funny.
And so it's like we have a very, like casual, kind of friendly nature about it. And, nobody, everybody feels like they're, like they're contributing, right? And nobody's like, oh, well, nobody's really nasty about it. It's like, "Oh, well, I did it like 2 times in a row. You gotta do it now." It's not like that. It's like, "All right, who wants to do it this time?" So it's like it's very open, very relaxed and open and, just a
Yeah.
lot of fun.
Now, if you could decide on just one genre to work on, what would that be?
Ooh, that's a tough question.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know how to answer that. That's really hard. One genre?
Well,
Like
ballpark.
forever?
Ballpark.
Oh, man. I guess if I had to pick one, I'd probably land on Star Wars.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. I love Star Wars so much that I actually did my own track with another composer friend of mine, Robert Lampkin. We did a collaborative track of a Star Wars track, which was very interesting, and how we actually did the workflow for that. And then I set and cut video to the track. Like, when I say
Oh wow.
video, I'm talking about like video game footage from Jedi Fallen Order and Survivor. So just as a demo, I did it as a demo.
That's
Oh,
awesome.
nice.
Yeah, just for
So,
practice, just because I love it so much. And so, but
Yeah.
another genre that I've really grown to love is trailer music. That stuff is so much fun, and I love doing the epic pop trailer, big vocal, power vocals, all that stuff. I love working with artists like that too. So it's really hard to pick.
It's kind of like a whole score in 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, it feels that way sometimes, right? Because you have like 2 minutes to 2:30 typically in a trailer, right?
Right.
Right. And so you write it in the format with the edit points where they're supposed to be. You create your 3 acts and then the extra bonus at the end. And then, you pitch it obviously to companies that specialize in trailers. And then you hope it gets placed, and used a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. What would you say your favorite Star Wars movie is?
Oh, it's episode 5, the original 5, hands down, Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
Yeah, that's the best 3-act storytelling for the Star Wars franchise that I've seen out of all of them. And then my second favorite would be Rogue.
Yeah, that's a good
mhm.
one too.
Yeah, because that was the most
So,
Star Warsy like film since, the first 3, the original 3.
right. So aside from like Star Wars, what are some of the other series that really stand out to you that you would love to work on?
Oh, okay, so if I'm gonna pick like another one, like a series like Lock and Key on Netflix would be super cool. That'd be awesome. Let's see, The Queen's Gambit would have been like super awesome to work on too, because that's like a blend of like strict classical but modernizing it in a way.
That's the
You know,
one that's about chess, right? With the girl.
yeah, that's awesome. I don't know if have you
Oh,
guys
that's
seen
an
it?
awesome show. Yeah, really, really
Yeah,
well made. Yeah.
yeah. You see Lock and Key?
No, didn't catch that one.
Oh, okay. Um, Even a basketball documentary. I love the way the music sounds in those. That'd be fun to, kind of like do some of that. But a lot of that stuff is still done through like sync placements and stuff like that.
I see. Do you like to switch do you like to switch up the genres a lot, or do you like working on the same thing for like half a year and then you move on to a different project?
No, I don't really, I guess, look at it that way. I do obviously pitch for the work that I'm strongest at. I have about 12 different genres that I write for, and 6 of them I just, can do even better than the other 6. So I focus on probably the 6 major ones mostly. But if a
Got
project
it.
comes up, if a project comes up and I know I can do it, I'll obviously sign up for it.
Right.
So like
So because you're
what are some
pitching
of
with a lot
the
of other people sometimes. So
like what are some of the more notable names that you've worked with, and was the experience like as good as you imagined?
um, so I'm not sure about notable names. A lot of people are kind of operate behind the scenes. I mentioned obviously Brianna. She's pretty notable. She's a power vocalist. Um, Working on Gala Loch Ness. He's pretty well known. London Elixir's pretty well known. And then there's a bunch of other people as well. I studied trailer writing with Michael Moss. That he's like the trailer king kind of guy. And so that's why I studied with him. And so, but in terms of working with everybody, it's been great. Everybody's been real amazing to work with. We kind of get along. I think that's probably why we ended up working together to begin with, because we kind of get along and clicked, kind of had a lot in common, and, kind of like the
Right.
vibe of each other. And
Right.
so, there's in the past, there's been some people where we didn't click, right? And we did have challenges like communicating, like you'd communicate in one way, and then the other person would be like, well, I'm kind of thinking this way. And so there was some gaps, and you kind of have to bridge the gap, between people who don't understand music and stuff like that. And so it's kind of challenging, but sometimes you can work it out and sometimes you can't. And so those are the types of things where sometimes you have to say, hey, maybe we should just kind of like go in a different direction. And so you kind of feel it out before you even work together. And so, but it does
Okay.
happen. But you try to avoid those situations ahead of time by kind of asking lots of questions about the project, and that way you don't get into the situation, right?
Yeah. Now, how do you mix in your study time? Like, what time do you dedicate towards just studying?
So since I write so much, it's kind of like now it's all one thing. Like my study time is
Yeah.
while I'm writing for stuff. Um,
Right.
Occasionally, when I have downtime, I will take a more structured approach to the harder genres, like the Star Wars genre or something more classical oriented, or I might even study how to do hip hop drums better, which I'm already pretty good at, but there's
Sure.
always room for improvement with all of the genres. So
Sure.
when I do take a more structured approach, I break it out like for orchestra stuff. I'll break it out into small segments and like pick like a John Williams track or something and just kind of like study like how things are done like really granularly, and then I'll step out and look at it from more like an element perspective, like almost like you have like big Lego building blocks perspective, like all these little modules kind of go together, and then you
Right.
can kind of look into each module to go, okay, what's going on in this little module over here? And then you can kind of zoom back out and go, okay, I've got this block and I've got this block. Let me put these together and it equals the intro or something like that. And so I get
Sure.
real granular like that, like what's the articulation, what key, what speed, how hard are they pressing on the bow, how fast are things going, all these different things. It gets real detailed. And then I'll take that and do a practice session to try to mimic in the computer, like
Got it. So what are you
recreate.
working on? What are you working on right now?
Well, I just finished that orchestral hip hop that was kind of like, Succession and the Queen's Gambit and all that. And so I studied obviously some classical elements. Like what did I want to bring in to kind of like make it kind of have that vibe? And so it ended up being more up close kind of sounding instruments with a more intimate feel instead of like just a lush orchestra all the time.
Right.
And so I used a specific virtual instrument called, what is it? Spitfire solo strings. And I blended it with like Albion One and Cinematic Studio strings. And so it gives you kind of like this natural grittiness of the instruments instead of just like a super smooth, like a concertino all the time, which is that silky smooth, string section. Sometimes you need a little bit of that closeness and just you want to hear the real bow sound, like especially when you're going like
Yeah.
like a quick passage or something, or even just like you
Yeah.
want to make it as real as possible. And so I study stuff like
Right.
that as well.
Right. Now, what about working with actual orchestras? Do you do that, or is everything like synthetic?
No, when the budget is there, I absolutely work with orchestras. Yeah, absolutely. And then I will do the
That's
music in the
awesome.
computer, hand it off to an orchestrator, and then they'll get it ready for, obviously the orchestra to read it and play it and all that.
So, like in the tech industry, network is extremely important. So, I'm pretty sure it's similar in the music industry. How important is networking, and how are you able to do it effectively?
Yeah, networking is key. I mean, because it's like with any business, you need to go out and meet people. You need to see what's going on in the industry. You need to learn from others. You need to have a mentor. You need to go to events, find out what everybody's doing. You need to shake hands. Find out, let people know you exist. Kind of that thing. Make some friends at the same time. It's kind of like I take a real casual approach to networking. It's kind of like "Hey, I love what you're doing. It's really cool. Let's talk sometime. Let's go do some coffee and let's do some lunch, whatever. Let's go hang out, And so kind of that's just my natural, I guess, way of doing things. And so I just kind of meet a lot of people, you know, some people you get along with, some people you don't. And then you kind of just gravitate towards people that you click with and that you get along with. And then you end up working together and then you still
Right.
stay in contact. And I mean, so it's,
So you keep it pretty casual.
yeah, I mean, it's not like, I mean, some people obviously they try too hard, right? You don't want to go up. It's like all business all the
Sure.
time. It's like
Yeah.
that's not cool. I mean, it's not like
That's not good. Yeah, it's not good.
I guess I like to obviously help people, right? So I'll even like sometimes like, hey man, what can I do to help, man? Let me know. Like you need something that's
Right.
not music related. I mean, you have a tech issue I can handle because I was in IT for so long, and so
Sure.
I've actually helped some people out that way, and didn't even want anything in return. I was just like, hey man, I can give you some quick help on that because I know the answer, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just
Oh, that's
like
awesome.
they did end up coming back around eventually and said, "Hey, I got this brief. You want to give it a shot?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. That's cool. It's in my genre, so why not?"
Right.
And so I wasn't intending on that happening. I was just doing what I knew how to do. And so, being with the service mindset's really great. Um, Kind of just relaxing, talking to people like they're, a person, instead of just like,
Right.
you know, just kind of just be chill, instead of like all tense and, you know, you've seen it out in public. I mean, it's like,
Yeah,
just be
absolutely.
cool. Just be cool,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So, like for somebody who's just trying to break into music, what are some good spots for them to network at?
Well, I mean, like for a composer, you mean? Or
Yeah, composer or work.
I mean, I started scoring student films, so I think that's a really great spot to start. Um, if you're looking for games, if you want to be a game composer, um, you can start with independent, game studios. You can hit, obviously like, the Steam engine, like the Steam community groups. There's some other Facebook groups that have like just community driven stuff. There's Discord channels you can find that you can get invited to. So there's a lot of stuff with indie you could start with. It's probably easier to get into the indie stuff because they need people to score, and you can obviously create a win-win scenario pretty quickly. You can negotiate to keep the music rights, but they can have unlimited usage no matter what for the tracks for just that project or whatever. Or if they want to pay you something for it, then you can say, yeah, okay, I'll sell them outright. Or you can do like an exchange for
Right.
whatever. You could just be creative, like just be cool about it. Talk to the people, like find out what their budget is, kind of what they're looking for, kind of let them know that if they're not paying you, that you should get something. And so you should own the music if they're not going to pay you for it. Right. So that
Yeah.
kind of
No.
thing.
I mean, what would you charge for like an indie game soundtrack?
Oh, yeah, it's not really can't really quantify that in just a quick number because there's so many elements that go into it, like so many scenarios. Like I can't
Sure.
even I couldn't even give you like a movie number because you'd have to know how many tracks they're going to be, how complicated the tracks are, how long the tracks are, how long is the film, what's their budget, there's a lot of factors involved.
Yeah.
But
I
I
mean,
mean,
let's say you got to do like 10 tracks for an indie game developer. What would that look like?
it's still hard to say because the budget changes on so many different games, and um, it could be really low, really high. Depends on indie, depends on the budget. I give you an example on film. A basic film, depending on
Sure.
what the budget is for the film, you could be scoring a film for $500, $3,000, 10,000, 50, 20, 100,000, depending on the budget. $1 million. It just depends on the different variables. It's kind of all over the map. I mean, I even Google from time to time, what are the industry standards? And it's like all over the place. So
Oh,
even,
wow.
Yeah, I'll look for it as well, and you'll find some numbers out there, but then they don't really hold true in the real world all the time because every deal is different. And I've even heard agents say that, like music composer agents, they say that there's never one number for one scenario, for every scenario. It's not just like,
Right.
you know,
Right.
because there's so many variables. And so the agents even say that they have to negotiate every single deal individually. And I thought that was very interesting.
Interesting. So it seems like you might need a team as well, like when you start negotiating deals. So like what are some of the other
Mhm.
important players you should have on your team? Lawyers and accountants, like
Yeah, you
anybody
definitely
else?
want to have a good entertainment attorney that you can have review contracts. Obviously, if you become good at reading contracts, you'll know whether or not you're out of your league on a contract really fast. And then, but it's always good to have an entertainment attorney just glance over it. So build a relationship with that person to have on your team. You definitely want a great an accountant. Not all accountants practice tax prep, so I would recommend finding an accountant that also does taxes because that they're directly related to one another. And then you want to build relationships with producers, directors, music supervisors, sync agents, lots of different people in industry to kind of have, on your team. And then orchestrators, if you're a composer, you want to obviously have great orchestrators. And if you don't mix and master, you want to make sure you have a person on your team that can do amazing mixing, and then of course mastering as well, if that's required for the different project you're working on. And so those are just some of the key people that you want to make sure you have on your team.
Now, for our audience, can you describe what what do you call it? Sync agent? Is it?
Yeah, if you're working in the sync license side of music, a sync agent is someone who you would pitch your music to, and if they're looking for what you have, they'll agree to sign the tracks to their catalog to then
Okay.
try to find an opportunity to place them.
Right.
And so at that point, you're the publisher, right? So you have to be really good at operating business. So you got to be good at metadata, catalog management, which is a lot of times done by Disco. That's kind of an industry standard for that side. And then obviously you want to be good at accounting, basic accounting. You want to understand how to manage money, how to do networking, how to do promotional stuff, how to run social media, all the different aspects of a small business that you would need to actually run and make money because it is a business. So that's one thing that when you are the publisher, you have to understand that you are running a small business. And so if you don't know how to do that, then
Right.
it's good to study that, get a mentor, or do both. I have mentors and I study stuff all the time. And so just kind of basic business practices of, how to market, how not to market, stuff like that.
Sounds like you're
Okay.
very open to learning.
Yeah, oh, yeah, that's another thing. You have to be open to learning. I think that's like a huge criteria, like a prerequisite, especially if you want to be a business owner. Like there's always something to learn, and you
Sure.
have to be, I wouldn't say fearless, but you have to be okay with some risk, right? Because, like you mentioned earlier, IT is nice and stable, right? It's predictable. You know exactly what you're doing. It's kind of like
Yeah.
cut and dry. You know what I mean? It's like the IT business, the music industry, I always say makes the IT business look easy, right? Because it's so vast and there's not like one direction to go with music, like say with IT. You get some customers, you do managed services for them, all these different things are really cut and dry with IT.
Yeah, I think very few people know how the music industry actually operates, especially in 2024.
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, I'm constantly studying it. I have a couple books, all you need to know about the music business, which has a yellow cover. I forget the author right off the top of my head, but then there's another one, The Plain and Simple Guide to Music Publishing by David Wixon or Daniel Wixon. It's a fourth edition. So those two books I'm in and out of all the time. And of course, other courses, on demand courses as well, like for marketing or like even training. If you need to get better at a certain genre, you find somebody who's doing it, like say Michael Moss, for example. He does an on-demand training class for how to operate within the sync music business. He also does a trailer course. There's also other communities like Sync Titan, which does the same thing, that's run by Michael Elsner and Jody Friedman. Jody Friedman is a really well-known music supervisor, and they run this community called Sync Titan. And it's training, and they give opportunities to pitch the things. And so it's kind of like an all-in-one community. And so definitely lots of studying, open to learning. It's a marathon is another aspect of the whole thing. It's not a sprint. It's going to be more of a long-term game. So
Yeah, it kind of
definitely,
reminds me
it's
of
not
like
like,
in the tech
yeah,
industry, programming, you have to be open to learning new frameworks, new libraries.
yep, yep. Or even if you're in compliance, say you're in PCI DSS compliance, right? You want to
Right.
learn all the different rules to operate within, and there's 12 domains, but there's like 400 subsections of total, for all the domains or something like that. It's like crazy. And so you have to study all the little components, know how they work together, you know. And then for music, it's great to know how to operate tech in it, because you're running a studio essentially. And so when something breaks, like the hard drive dies, oops, I hope I have a backup, right? So
Yeah,
you have to
right.
do like, you kind of have to think like a business owner in that respect. It's like, okay, do I have my backup? How old is this computer? Man, do I need to budget for a new computer? How are these monitors running? Do I need
Right.
any new virtual instruments? Like
Right.
run budgets, all those things. So
Yeah,
it definitely,
yeah, it's
it's a
complex.
lot.
Sounds complex.
It is complex, but it's totally doable. Totally doable. And I always like to say, you can do anything you want to do, but just not all at the same time. And so you start with one
Sure.
step, and then you learn the next step, and then the next step. And it's like this accumulative thing. Then you look back a year or 2 or 5 years later, and you're like, man, I didn't think I went that far, but I did. I actually went pretty far. Man, I wonder what the next 5 years is going to be like.
Kind of like what goal setting you're saying?
Yeah, you do goal settings. I like to do smaller goals, right? Because if you set and try to hit like one big target, well, what are the steps to get there? You have to kind of reverse engineer how to get to that goal,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know?
That's
Right.
my
So,
thought.
yeah, break it up into smaller steps, complete each step within, the estimated timeline you thought you could do it in, but be flexible when you don't hit that deadline. Obviously, some deadlines have to be more set in stone than other ones. But, don't beat yourself up when you don't meet something that is flexible. You just kind of like, okay, I tried my best. I got really close. What can I do better next time? And then you
Right.
still work to complete the goal. Maybe it's like a week later, a month later, or whatever. But you still get it done. But client deadlines are the ones that don't move, right? You want to make sure you meet those, no questions asked, because
Sure, sure.
you want them to come back.
That's where you're being paid.
Right, like with the movies, for example, on a movie I did last year, they needed it done in a month, like 4 weeks. I said, "Okay, I'll do it in 4,"
Oh
but I did it
wow.
in 3 because I knew I could do it in 3.
Yeah.
And I told them, I said, "I might do it in 3, but is it okay if I have that extra week just in case?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. If you need 4, take 4, but if you do it in 3, even better." So, I was very
Right.
open about it, and we talked about it, and it wasn't like I was trying to hide something. That's like the worst thing. It's better to just talk about everything up front, that kind of thing.
Sure, sure. That makes sense.
So yeah, you spoke on
Yeah.
mentors. Finding mentors is very important. How should someone like where can somebody find these mentors at, and how does somebody approach them typically?
Right. Well, my first mentor was through ThinkSpace Education, which is an online music composition school. They also teach other things like orchestral mixing and how to make a template and stuff like that. And so I got their music for Media Gold, you know, course, and that came with a professional composer to review all my assignments, and they'd give me written feedback, and I would take their notes and go back to my session and implement the notes as practice, right? And so that right there was incredibly valuable. I mean, I think that was the best foundation it probably could have done for writing to picture, like scoring to picture.
Got
So
it.
that
It
that's a great way to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it seems like the crowd you keep in the music industry is very important. I've heard like a lot of horror stories. So like what are some of the criteria you use to assess whether like you want to keep this person around or hey, maybe I should stay away from this person?
Um, I mean, that's kind of like scenario based, right? So it really depends on what has happened or occurred. I'm kind of more along the lines of like I'll review like the scenario and find out what happened because maybe it was something like really dire that they couldn't avoid, right? So before I just fire somebody, I'll kind of talk to them and find out, hey man, like what happened, you know? Um, and then there's been times where like a vocalist just flaked and they didn't show up, they didn't communicate, they didn't deliver, the tracks on time, and we missed a pitch for a TV show because of that. So obviously,
That's major. That's major.
we found out at that point because it was a three-way collab, and so me and the other composer found out that they just said they forgot,
Oh,
and
Wow.
we were like, "Well, thanks for being honest, but we're gonna find somebody else,"
yeah, we're gonna keep moving.
Right, and so that kind of case, it's like that's not really professional, right? But most of the people I work with don't. That doesn't happen. Like
So if somebody flakes on you
95% of the
one
time.
time, do you
So
leave the door shut like or do you give them another chance typically?
I typically give people another chance, unless it's like something so obvious, like I just forgot and didn't give it to you, even though they knew there was a deadline, right? So that's kind of like a one-time shot. If you know there's a deadline, but you just forgot, that's not acceptable. But if you knew there's a deadline and you didn't communicate because maybe your car broke down or somebody passed away or you had to do something like really catastrophic that was out of your control, then yeah, obviously you get another shot, of course.
Absolutely. I think that's all the questions I had. Did you have any other questions, Brian?
No, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground and talked about sync licensing and sync agents. It's all very interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
definitely a lot to it. There's always something to learn.
absolutely. Yeah, we definitely appreciate you coming on the show. Did you have any closing thoughts you want to leave with the audience?
Um, yeah, I mean, some of the things that we've already talked about is, be open to learning, be flexible, but stand your ground when you need to. And one of the mindset things I always like to share with people is that if you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them. So be very aware of your mindset and like how you're thinking about things, right? Because if you constantly make excuses for stuff instead of trying to find a solution for it, then you're living with your limitations, basically. So you have to
Now, let
be
me
get
ask
the right.
you, what would be your number one tip for someone that's just breaking into composition?
Um, the very first thing that I would recommend is to learn your equipment. So that's not an excuse. Take the technology excuse out of the mix by learning it so well that you just know exactly how to operate it. Not how to fix everything if it breaks necessarily, but how to work all the tools. If you're working with the orchestra and the computer, make sure you understand how to write for a violin, how to write for a viola, how they're supposed to sound, right? So learn your gear and get training at the same time. Study, 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 and then practice a lot. And then learn your
Right,
styles at the same time.
right.
So those little like 3 or 4 things would be the perfect starting point.
Yeah, that makes
Absolutely.
sense. That makes sense.
But yeah, man, we definitely appreciate you stopping by the show, man. We'll definitely have to bring you back sometime.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. It's always great to hang out and kind of talk about what's going on in the industry and try to drop some gems to help some folks. And, I'm always open when you guys want me back.
Absolutely. No, it's been great. It's been great, Luke.
Yeah, in closing, where can the audience reach you at?
The best place to get a hold of me is on social media, and it's at Luke Truan Music, or you can do my website at luketruanmusic.com. Those are the best ways to get a hold of me.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time. Peace.
Thanks, guys.